Human being is exceptionally blessed with higher level thinking abilities of creativity and problem solving. Such activities require use of already stored information along with the information concurrently received from the environment. A thorough account of these multi-step processes will be presented in this lesson. First of all, we will discuss meaning, aspects and stages of creativity. This will be followed by a description of measurement of creativity and its relationship with intelligence. The most advanced thought process, creativity, involves production of uncommon and novel ideas that are highly relevant to the situation. Creativity is defined as something different from intelligence and as a parallel construct to intelligence, but it differs from intelligence in that it is not restricted to cognitive or intellectual functioning or behavior. Instead, it is concerned with a complex mix of motivational conditions, personality factors, environmental conditions, chance factors, and even products. Creativity is the goal-directed thinking which is unusual, novel and useful. Many of such creative thinking become so important that they influence the whole human civilization and are called as historical creativity. The Mona Lisa, the laws of thermodynamics, the laws of motion, the theory of relativity are some of the ideas that were never thought before and changed the human civilization altogether in a great way in their respective spheres of life. Although we can accept its existence and importance, it has been a highly difficult task for the researchers to define creativity. Newell, Shaw and Simon have explained the nature of creativity on the basis of following 4 criteria. Novelty and usefulness, rejects previously accepted ideas, requires intense motivation and persistence, results from organizing the unclear situation in a coherent, clear and new way. Sternberg reports 5 commonalities in the research of creativity. They are: creativity involves thinking that aims at producing ideas or products that are relatively novel and that are in some respect compelling. Creativity has some domain specific and domain general elements in the sense that it needs some specific knowledge, but there are certain elements of creativity that cut across different domains. Creativity is measurable, at least to some extent. Creativity can be developed and promoted. Creativity is not highly rewarded in practice as it is supposed to be in theory. The process of creativity is thought to have 4 characteristics. It is imaginative, involving imagination, since it is the process of generating something original. It is purposeful, that is, creativity is imagination put into action towards an end. It produces something original in relation to one's own previous work, to their peer group, or to anyone's previous output in a particular field. It has value in respect to the objective it was applied for. Creativity involves not only the generation of ideas, but also evaluation of them and deciding which one is the most adequate one. Bigetto and Kaufman conceptualize creativity in 3 different ways. They define creativity as novel and personally meaningful interpretation of experiences, actions, and events. However, the novelty and meaningfulness of these interpretations need not require to be original or even meaningful to others. Indeed, the judgment of novelty and meaningfulness that constitutes creativity is an intrapersonal judgment. This intrapersonal judgment is what distinguishes creativity from other forms of creative expressions. There are 2 types of creativity: little creativity or everyday creativity and big creativity or eminent creativity. These 2 forms of creativity rely on interpersonal and historical judgments of novelty, appropriateness, and lasting impact. Sternberg has proposed investment and confluence theory to understand creativity. According to the investment theory, creativity requires a confluence of 6 distinct but interrelated resources, that is, intellectual abilities, knowledge, styles of thinking, personality, motivation, and environment. Although levels of these resources are sources of individual differences, often the decision to use a resource is a more important source of individual differences. 3 intellectual skills are particularly important: the synthetic skill to see problems in new ways and to escape the bounds of conventional thinking, the analytical skill to recognize which of one's ideas are worth pursuing and which are not, the practical contextual skill to know how to persuade others or to sell other people on the value of one's ideas. The confluence of these three skills is also important. Analytic skills used in the absence of the other two skills results in powerful, critical but not creative thinking. Synthetic skill used in the absence of the other two skills results in new ideas that are not subjected to the scrutiny required to improve them and make them work. Practical contextual skill in the absence of the other two skills may result in societal acceptance of ideas not because the ideas are good but rather because the ideas have been well and powerfully presented. On the one hand, one needs to know enough about a field to move it forward. On the other hand, knowledge about a field can result in a closed and entrenched perspective, resulting in a person's not moving beyond the way in which he or she has seen problems in the past. Knowledge thus can help or it can hinder creativity. Thinking styles are preferred ways of using one's skills. In essence, they are decisions about how to deploy the skills available to a person. With regard to thinking styles, a legislative style is particularly important for creativity, that is, a preference for thinking and a decision to think in new ways. This preference needs to be distinguished from the ability to think creatively. Someone may like to think along new lines but not think well, or vice versa. It also helps to become a major creative thinker if one is able to think globally as well as locally, distinguishing the forest from the trees and thereby recognizing which questions are important and which ones are not. Numerous research investigations have supported the importance of certain personality attributes for creative functioning. These attributes include, but are not limited to, willingness to overcome obstacles, willingness to take sensible risks, willingness to tolerate ambiguity, and self-efficacy. In particular, buying low and selling high typically means defying the crowd, so that one has to be willing to stand up to conventions if one wants to think and act in creative ways. Often creative people seek opposition, that is, they decide to think in ways that countervail how others think. Note that none of the attributes of creative thinking is fixed. One can decide to overcome obstacles, take sensible risks, and so forth. Intrinsic task-focused motivation is also essential to creativity. The research of Amabel and others has shown the importance of such motivation for creative work and has suggested that people rarely do truly creative work in an area unless they really love what they are doing and focus on the work rather than the potential rewards. Motivation is not something inherent in a person. One decides to be motivated by one thing or another. Often, people who need to work in a certain area that doesn't particularly interest them will decide that given the need to work in that area, they had better find a way to make it interest them. Finally, one needs an environment that is supportive and rewarding of creative ideas. One could have all of the internal resources needed to think creatively, but without some environmental support like a forum for proposing those ideas, the creativity that a person has within him or her might never be displayed. Concerning the confluence of these 6 components, creativity is hypothesized to involve more than a simple sum of a person's level on each component. First, there may be thresholds for some components, example knowledge, below which creativity is not possible regardless of the levels on other components. Second, partial compensation may occur in which strength on one component, example motivation, counteracts a weakness on another component, example environment. Third, interactions may occur between components such as intelligence and motivation, in which high levels on both components could multiplicatively enhance creativity. Guilford considered creative thinking as involving divergent thinking, which emphasizes fluency, flexibility, originality, and elaboration. Guilford, however, noted that creative thinking is not the same as divergent thinking because creativity requires sensitivity to problems as well as redefining abilities, which include transformations of thought, reinterpretations, and freedom from functional fixedness in driving unique solutions. In order to develop Torrance' test of creative thinking and in its further revisions, Torrance has explained 6 components of creativity. He has described these aspects of creativity in terms of their mode of measurement. These aspects of creativity are fluency. The number of relevant ideas shows an ability to produce a number of figural images. Flexibility. Flexibility is the individual's ability to produce not only a large number of responses, ideas or solutions to a problem, but also a variety of responses, ideas or solutions to a problem. Originality. The number of statistically infrequent ideas shows an ability to produce uncommon or unique responses. Elaboration. The number of added ideas demonstrates the subject's ability to develop and elaborate on ideas. Abstractness of titles. The degree beyond labeling based on the idea that creativity requires an abstraction of thought. It measures the degree a title moves beyond concrete labeling of the pictures drawn. Resistance to premature closure. The degree of psychological openness based on the belief that creative behavior requires a person to consider a variety of information when processing information and to keep an open mind. The history of research on stages of creativity began with Graham Wallas, who suggested that creative thinking follows 4 successive steps. They are: stage of preparation. The subject begins to gather information about the problem to be solved and attempts some solutions. This stage is characterized by a state of trial and error in learning. Therefore, the subject is advised to learn as much as possible about the problem area. In preparation, the thinker begins recalling personal experiences and investigating in all different directions to gather information about the problem to be solved. The object of defining the focus question of interest is to list all concepts associated with the focus question. Since the goal from this procedure is to generate the largest possible list, the thinker should not worry about redundancy, relative importance, or relationships at this point. Stage of incubation. In the second stage, the solution exists but is not clear. The subject must not intentionally work on the problem. Instead, it is allowed to sink into the unconscious. In this stage, the solution exists but it is not clear. Therefore, the thinker must not intentionally work on the problem. Instead, he or she should be allowed to sink into the unconscious, and the thinker is advised to relax and reflect on his or her question, which might lead him or her to modification of the focus question. Stage of illumination. In the third stage, the subject suddenly experiences insight into the problem when a new solution, idea, or relationship emerges. In other words, the subject attempts to reformulate his or her ideas or to formulate new ones. The subject is more active and more conscious work is needed in this stage. In the stage of illumination, the thinker experiences insight into the problem when a new solution, idea, or relationship emerges. Thus, he or she attempts to reformulate his or her ideas or to formulate new ones. Stage of verification. Finally, the subject tries and checks the solution. In this stage, some modification may also occur to ideas reached in the previous stages. In the stage of verification, the thinker tests, tries, and checks the solution he or she created. Since this stage is the final one, the thinker may well make some modification to his or her ideas which he or she reached in the previous stages. In this stage, thinker should rework the structure of his or her map to represent his or her collective understanding of the relationships and connections among groupings, which may include adding, subtracting, or changing superordinate concepts. Thus, he or she may need to review his or her concept map as he or she gains new knowledge or new insights. In some situations, the above stages may appear in a different order or combined into 2 or 3 stages. They also do not occur regularly. For example, sometimes the subject's knowledge of the problem area allows him or her to pass over the first stage, that is preparation stage, and move on to the next stage, incubation stage, or even to the third stage. Creativity and intelligence. In one extreme opinion, creativity and intelligence are regarded as totally independent of each other. Intelligence is not supposed to influence creativity. Creativity is viewed as a mental operation accessible to everyone. It is supposedly dependent on domain-specific knowledge, that is, the amount of exposure to and expertise in a given field, and deliberate practice. This position denies not only the influence of intelligence but of any individual difference beyond knowledge and motivational factors on creativity. A high IQ has proven as insufficient for creativity ever since Terman's famous longitudinal study of 1528 highly gifted children, which had a mean of IQ of 151. While most of these children achieved remarkable occupational success in later life, none of them showed a noteworthy sign of creativity. Most of the studies concerning the association between psychometric intelligence and creativity yielded only a weak relationship. For example, Torrance reported the median of 178 correlation coefficients between IQ and TTCT was only 0.20. Also, factor analysis of IQ and creativity tests yielded separate factors. However, a creative person's IQ has been demonstrated to be at least a standard deviation above the mean, often more. Guilford suggested a hypothesis that a minimal level of IQ of an arbitrary set to 120 should be necessary but not sufficient for creativity. Creative achievement was thought to be impossible below this threshold. Guilford also proposed that scatter plots of IQ and creativity should show a triangular pattern, which gave Guilford's claim sometimes the name triangularity hypothesis, with no data points in the low IQ or high creativity quadrant. This threshold view of creativity is so plausible that it is widely accepted, though empirical tests are scarce and more likely to show a disconfirming tendency. Hayes proposed an alternative certification hypothesis which doubted intrinsic links between creativity and intelligence. Instead, it stated that most possibilities to display a recognizable level of creativity, like occupations in architecture or science, simply require a high level of formal education. Since academic performance is correlated with IQ, society simply denies creative individuals of low IQ the chance to express their talent adequately. Houts and Krug provide a review of several tests developed for the assessment of creativity. The review reveals that most of the tests of creativity intend to measure divergent thinking. Within the category of divergent thinking, Houts and Craig present the Torrance test of creative thinking, the Walsh and Kogan test, the Guilford battery. The most widely used test on creativity is the Torrance test creative thinking. It is also the one that has the most extended research on the reliability and validity. This test has been translated into more than 30 languages and it is used in different places as a tool to assess creative potential. It is based on Guilford's structure of the intellect battery that included some measures of divergent thinking. Thus, it measures creativity through divergent thinking. The TTCT was developed in 1966 and it has been renormed 4 times, that is 1974, 1984, 1990 and 1998. There are 2 forms, TTCT verbal and figural, with 2 parallel tests. Each test is expected to measure fluency, originality, elaboration and flexibility. Fluency is the number of ideas, the total number of relevant responses. Originality refers to the rarity of ideas, the number of statistically infrequent ideas. The score is 0 if the idea is common and 1 if it is unique. Elaboration is the number of added ideas. Flexibility is the number of categories of the relevant responses. In 1990, Torrance deleted the flexibility scale since it correlated highly with fluency and added 2 measures of creative potential, that is, abstractness of titles and resistance to premature closure. While abstractness of title refers to the degree a title moves beyond concrete labeling of pictures drawn, resistance to premature closure pertains to measure the degree of psychological openness. The test can be administered in 30 minutes, but the process of scoring requires some training and specific country norms. The 1998 manual provides norms for the United States and includes both grade related and age related norms. Thus, there is some country specificity in the measurement of creativity. Kim reported some normative measures in other countries too. These norms have usually been developed for research activities. Creativity is defined as a goal-directed thinking which is unusual, novel and useful. Such a thought process rejects the previously accepted ideas and organizes the unclear situation in new and coherent way. Investment theory states that creativity requires a confluence of 6 distinct but interrelated resources: intellectual abilities, knowledge, styles of thinking, personality, motivation, and environment. Divergent thinking is thought to be a central component in any type of creative thinking. Other aspects of creative thinking are fluency, flexibility, originality, elaboration, abstraction, and resistance to premature closure. Creativity follows a four-step process consisting of preparation, incubation, illumination, and verification. Although creativity requires a minimum IQ of 120, but beyond that level, relationship between intelligence and creativity is either not clear or is very weak. Most of the tests of creativity intend to measure divergent thinking. Such a widely used test is TTCT, which includes both verbal and figural items.